Good evening and bienvenidos. This is the sixth in an 8-part series of community discussions on racial justice and law enforcement, organized by the College Community Partnership for Racial Justice and presented online by the Levitt Center for Public Affairs at Hamilton College and broadcast live this evening by WPNY. The partnership includes all 6 colleges in Oneida and Herkimer counties, as well as the Community Foundation of Herkimer and Oneida counties, the United Way of the Valley and Greater Utica, the Mohawk Valley Frontiers Club, the Mohawk Valley Latino Association, and the Oneida County Save Our Streets program. Our goal every week has been to develop a dialogue on racial equity and criminal justice, and to support our 28 municipalities with a law enforcement presence comply with Governor Cuomo's mandated reform decree. My name is Tony Colón. I am chairman of the Mohawk Valley Community College Board of Trustees. I will serve as your moderator this evening. We will begin with a presentation and 2 responses that will take us about to 7:30 p.m. I invite those watching to join us online so that you too can participate in the conversation by visiting communityforjustice.org. That's community, the number 4, justice.org. For those of you joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. After the presentation and responses, I will ask submitted questions to the panel. At approximately 7:50 to 7:55, we will turn to Doc Michael Woods for a musical segment. Doc, a professor of music at Hamilton College, is a celebrated composer and performer. The television portion of tonight's broadcast will end at 8 p.m. But for those of you watching on WPNY, you can continue viewing the balance of our program online. Our group's expectations are for the community to join us in this process and partake in the open and serious discussion that leads to a permanent change in Herkimer and Oneida counties. Please invite your family and friends to join us in solving some of the age-old problems that exist throughout our region. Muchas gracias for joining us in this historic gathering. And you do not have to wait too long to voice your comments and opinions. Please take the survey on racial equity and criminal justice by texting MV Justice, so that's MV for Mohawk Valley Justice, to the number 898-211. That's MV Justice to the number 898-211. The topic for tonight's discussion is punishment and corrections, and we'll touch on some of the issues in our county jails and probation departments and the educational and second chance programs underway. And now, as I ask our panelists to give us a wave when I introduce them, let's begin with our presenter tonight is Professor Doran Larson. Professor Larson is Walcott Bartlett Professor of Literature at Hamilton College. He has been teaching inside New York State prisons since 2006 and has organized college in-person programs inside 2 New York State facilities. His research field is the history of writing by the incarcerated people in the United States. The first response will be from Brother Courtney Muhammad. Student minister, Brother Courtney Muhammad is a local representative of the Nation of Islam and coordinator for the Muhammad Study Circle of Utica. And the second response will be presented by Mr. Lee Carr. Mr. Carr has just come home from serving a 10-year, 4-month federal prison sentence and is dedicating his life to the front lines of helping society understand the reentry process and what is needed to make that transition. Mr. Carr will address his new life's journey and the difficulties of a successful transition due to the limited funding and resources available for second chance programs. And now, Doran, you have the floor and the screen.
Thanks very much, Tony. I want to thank everybody, the Levitt Center, Frank Anacarico, Oneida and Herkimer County Foundations, and everybody involved in putting this important series together. It's really an honor to be on a panel with Courtney Muhammad and with Lee Carr, who no doubt are going to bring really important and vital information and experience to this panel. I also wanted to thank Patrick Johnson and Scott McNamara, who were on the panel last week. I thought that we saw there a example of really realistic and simultaneously hopeful vision and examples, the resources that we have in this region for working together from very different perspectives. That week, last week, was a very local view of things. This week, I'm going to back up a little bit and offer sort of broader vision within which to locate jail activities in the area. So in addressing how jails fit into any agenda for criminal justice reform, a useful first step is to disaggregate jails, county level facilities, from the much better understood roles of state and federal prisons. Everyone who goes to prison first has spent time in a jail, and often more than once. Jails where intervention in the imprisonment cycle can be most effective among the widest population. While between 600 and 700,000 people enter and are released from state and federal prisons each year, admissions to US jails number over 12 million. Jails are, in effect, the bustling lobbies to a sprawling 2.3 million person city in confinement. What I want to advocate for here is a penal facility reform agenda that starts at the front rather than at the back door of mass incarceration. Alongside the sheer numbers, the second reason to focus on jails is the nature of their populations. Among the 731,000 people held in local jails, the majority have not been convicted of a crime and are awaiting resolution of their cases. That is to say, nearly 1/4 of the unprecedented US carceral population are people who should be presumed innocent. In addition, 75% of both those serving jail sentences of less than a year and awaiting trial or plea bargain have been convicted or accused of nonviolent traffic, property, drug, and public disorder offenses. Crimes that both critics and the public often cite as though that should never result in jail time, but in treatment, education, job training, and in other much more behavior-specific resolutions. Such approaches can be particularly effective in jails simply because jails see so many repeat admissions. According to the Vera Institute, quote, in New York City from 2008 through 2013, just shy of 500 people were admitted to jail 18 times or more, accounting for more than 10,000 jail admissions and 300,000 days in jail, unquote. 68% of people in jail have a history of abusing drugs, alcohol, or both. 47% have not graduated from high school, and the percentage of persons suffering serious psychological distress in US jails is over 6 times that of the general population. Jails, in short, see populations in dire need of services outside of the typical jail mission. Serving sentences and waiting trial by sitting around in concrete rooms playing cards and watching TV is making no one better, nor is it making communities more whole. In preparing for this talk, I interviewed former Oneida County Correctional Facility officials and people formerly locked up there. And I found them in remarkable agreement about the problems that need to be addressed and about the one improvement they recommend. And that improvement is more programming. A third reason to look at jail reform is the opportunity of this particular moment. Despite the political polarization we see today, lawmakers have crossed the aisle to work on reforms to reduce prison populations by getting out those accused or convicted of nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious charges. Yet at the state prison level, release of every one of these so-called non-non-nons would not result in the kind of reductions most people want to see. In state prisons, the majority of people held are in for violent crimes. This is not because we now have historically high levels of violent crime in the US. Those numbers have been going down for nearly 30 years, but because of the extraordinarily long sentences that began to be handed out during the tough on crime era of the 1980s and the 1990s. The percentage of violent crimes represented in state prisons is high because people convicted of these crimes stay for so long. County jails, in contrast, are full of these non-non-nons. And this is all the more reason to make jail time as constructive as possible. So what is being done now? In the OC Sheriff's 2019 report, program offerings include a law library where people can study and address their own cases, a commissary where people can buy shampoo, soap, and other hygiene items, as well as cookies, candies, and chips. And profits from the commissary go to purchasing, quote, television, cable TV, board games, basketballs, and other items that directly benefit the inmate population, unquote. A sewing program allows incarcerated women produce items donated to local organizations. A horticultural program provides the means to grow vegetables and to help support area beautification. Work programs involve screened and accepted people in washing cars in the jail's laundry, food, and janitorial services. As the report claims, quote, these programs help alleviate the boredom and idleness that can lead to facility incidents. They also increase the inmate's self-esteem and skill level and help prepare them for reentry into society, unquote. No doubt much of this work may be transformative to people who have never held regular jobs or met regular schedules. But even at their best, the inclusion of these programs is selective, and the default is boredom and idleness. As one of my interviewees noted, OC jail time is now largely, quote, playing cards on the pod and watching TV, unquote, a sentiment echoed by former staff. This is, of course, a missed opportunity. First, because jails are the place where long-term incarceration begins, where the provision of programming can jam the revolving door of incarceration. Second, such access is not just a matter of numbers, but of geography. One part of sentencing to prison is effective exile from families and communities. Men and women in state prisons often serve their time hundreds of miles from their domestic partners, children, and other family members. Regular contact with whom is one of the best indicators for successful reentry. The OCCF stands just 15 minutes from downtown Utica. Even the short distance can be a real obstacle for people without cars or without the time or resources to get away from work. Yet, as the very Institute of Justice points out, jails are, quote, located near the communities to which people in jail will return, and re-entry staff can work with community providers to develop re-entry plans for people leaving jail that target specific needs, unquote. And third, what needs to be done is not a particular mystery. A 2001 article on community policing co-authored by the chief of the Savannah Police Department suggests the direction, quote, unlike the typical police performance measures of arrest and crime rates found in traditional police philosophies, community-oriented policing measures are more general and tend to measure the extent to which police affect the quality of life in the communities they serve, as well as the problems they solve. What I'd like to suggest here is a model of community jailing, by which we do not measure the performance of jails by the number of people admitted, but by the success of those who leave the facility. Not by the number of people locked up, but by the number enabled to become employed with a sense of direction for their futures. Not by the number of possible crimes thwarted, but by the breadth of opening of opportunities for employment, education, recovery, and healing, which are the real bulwarks against future offenses. That is, rather than thinking about jails and reentry, we might think about jails as the first point of reentry. True community service in jail operations should mean more than simple containment and incapacitation of people who have violated or are suspected of violating the peace. What I'm calling community jailing is proactive, measured by the extent to which jails affect, quote, the quality of life in the communities they serve, as well as the problems they solve, unquote. So what might that mean in practice? First, no one in jail should be in jail that shouldn't be in jail. That's not just a circular statement. The OCCF has made reforms that have helped to see that people who would not be sentenced to jail time, even if convicted, are not spending time there. New York bail reform is aimed at assuring that people are not locked up simply for being poor. While these reforms were long overdue, at best they seek to see that jails do not do added harm to people or communities. But we can, of course, aspire to much more. Solid data is, of course, essential to any reform efforts. Currently, the OCCF database software handling intake cannot track repeat admissions. Of the 3,360 OC jail admissions in 2019, there is no way to determine how many of those admissions were readmissions. That means that if one goal of reform is to reduce jail numbers by redirecting people to more appropriate services, there is only anecdotal evidence of the people most in need of such services. Data aimed at shifting thinking and priorities are also needed. If the aim is to make jails more responsive to the practical needs of the community, understanding how the criminal justice system is experienced by the community is essential. Last week, Patrick Johnson offered a clarifying depiction of the experience of a Black person moving into and through a criminal justice system populated overwhelmingly by white police, lawyers, judges, and staff. If the criminal justice system in the city of Utica were reflective of the city's population, according to the US Census Bureau, over 1/3 of all such personnel would be people of color. The percentage among OC correction staff today is just 7%. Such a change would be a challenge to achieve, and even achieving such a goal, research shows, is no guarantee of better treatment. In the meantime, however, we could begin to document where, no matter the staff profile, effective change in jail practices might begin by bringing the people held there into the conversation. In my own research, I have read hundreds of essays by people describing their experience inside prisons across the country. Each writer describes a singular experience, and very few are not highly critical. Yet when read in aggregate, essays from Alaska and Florida, Maine, and Texas and California quickly unveil abiding patterns. If every person admitted to the OCCF were asked at release to fill out a voluntary, anonymous survey about their experience, including space for an open written description, we would have a basis for assessing current practices from their receiving end. This, of course, could be applied as well to probation and other reentry services. Just in the interviews that I conducted for this talk, among community members and those held in the OCCF, my distinct impression was that of a tale of two jails. The jail experienced by people of color and the one experienced by whites. My interviews don't provide the basis for any broad generalizations. Yet any jail reform agenda could wisely start by asking what the community most directly affected by these practices is experiencing. Everyone I spoke to, no matter their race, former officials and incarcerated, noted the need for a change in culture. Even if staff cannot soon reflect the community, all agreed on the need, as one formerly incarcerated man said, of, quote, people who care about people and compassionate people, unquote. I've no doubt, and several people I spoke to confirmed there are indeed such people on staff in the jail. But research has shown that the so-called few bad apples view does not account for the pernicious effects of bad staff behavior. As research shows, and as former Oneida County Sheriff's Office Undersheriff Robert Swinskowski told me, problem staff can act, quote, like a cancer, unquote. He suggests more staff training in the recognition and protection of human rights and dignity. Another major priority has to be, of course, proactive rather than merely reactive engagement with the people held inside. Incarcerated people need, as one interviewee stated, quote, something that can change a person's life, unquote. Especially for repeat offenders, jail time should, quote, help people find direction, unquote. That is, jail time should not be merely about judging or punishing past behavior, but about seeking better futures. This is also a culture issue because people trained in enforcing the law are often reluctant to reach out to other services, which requires admitting that a problem is beyond their expertise in mental illness, addiction, education, vocational training, etc. Rewarding staff for helping people to the services they really need might break that reluctance. Both former staff and incarcerated people told me there is need for employment training and active partnerships with local employers. As the founding organizer of 2 college programs in New York State prisons, I can testify that a single successfully completed college course can be transformative for people who have failed at or been failed by public education. The GED program now in place in the jail should be expanded and supplemented by higher education courses for anyone serving a term of 3 months or more. Our 2 counties are extraordinarily rich in higher education institutions, and there are few, if any, obstacles to offering college courses at county jails that could not be addressed as they have been already at several of our local prisons, a topic I'll be happy to speak about in our discussion. Vocational training could also be offered to people serving extended jail terms. There's also a wealth of opportunities for community volunteers to work with jail people, as they do in the hundreds for men held inside the 3 local prisons and do today at the Oneida County Jail, providing AA groups and religious study. Those of us lucky enough to live in low crime communities know from experience, the most effective crime fighting is not done by the police, courts, jails, or prisons. It is done by regular and reliable employment, good schools, access to physical and mental health care, and by community cohesiveness. That is, by every community member feeling that they have realistic hopes for secure futures. Jails cannot fix communities that lack these advantages, but they are the places where the human fallout from the absence of such supports are witnessed daily and in large numbers. Community jailing means expanding the jail mission from public safety into public betterment. As we move forward with the criminal justice and racial equity agenda, I urge us to re-envision our county jails as sites not just of containment, but of aid, healing, and renewal. Thanks very much. Oh, Tony, I think you're on mute.
All right, well, here we go. Brother Courtney Muhammad, you're up.
Yes, sir. In the name of Allah, God, however you may call his name, Allah, Jah, Jehovah, Yahweh, your creator, our sustainer, our evolver, I greet everyone in the greeting words of peace in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum, which just means peace be unto you. And before I get into what I'm going to speak, I would just like to lay the base. Thank you, Mr. Larson and the group that has put this together for us. And I pray that my words are heard. With the question of if Black lives matter in America and the growing rejection of the architecture of white supremacy, we are being moved to a critical point in world history. And indeed, we are making history as we speak here in America. The Black and white question, and will there be a just and equitable path towards a future for the both of us, is square on the table today. With this in mind, I offer you, as I am one that comes out of the religious traditions, I wrestled with myself about what would I speak about today, and so much filled me because I have a 20-year sojourn in corrections from docks and also some federal prisons. In many different aspects, I've traveled the entire state of New York as a docks employee and a chaplain, and went in from mediums to maximums facilities and have had office space in also Albany and New York City. And I've also worked reentry, and I had the pleasure to working with Scott for a moment, Scott McNamara, the DA, in a reentry program that we had slated for Utica. But with all of my observations over 20 years and all of the ups and downs, I chose not to speak of the difficulties and offer a line of solution for a smaller area, but my spirit has moved me and God has given me a sign to just read. So I'm gonna read very briefly from a book called Torchlight for America. And it answers the questions in a big way, because today we're in a time and a period that big things are happening. And no matter how dark it gets, I had a friend It's at any time hardship came into her life, she always smiled because she knew at the end of the suffering and the hardship, something good was coming about. Beginning reforming Black inmates by helping them to make a new beginning in a land of their own. America has not found a way to curb crime and reform those in her society who consistently break her laws, particularly in the Black community. The fact is that due to the high rate of recidivism, most of the street crime is in this country is perpetuated by the same set of people. Instead of being reformed, a substantial number of people are recycled through committing crime and then being incarcerated again and again. The threat of street crime to life and property and the great cost to the American taxpayer for warehousing people in jails and prisons continues unabated. We have an idea for addressing the problem of crime and reforming the so-called criminal that can at the same time relieve some of America's burdens and even elevate her status and stature in the eyes of God and the nations of the earth. America and the nations of the earth are in competition for developing the resources of Africa. The next significant economic growth opportunity in the global economy, Blacks in America could help to foster the relationship that could cause America to be first in line in trade relations with Africa and the development of her mineral resources, which is the prize sought by every nation that would hope to be a world leader in the 21st century. However, America's foreign policy and relations with other nations is largely a reflection of the results of her treatment of the different ethnic and racial groups within her borders. If America would improve her treatment of Black people, she could leverage that improved treatment to foster favorable relations with Africa. Also, if America would develop an enlightened foreign policy towards Africa, this would lead to a strong trade and economic opportunities. We are proposing that America, by encouraging development in the Black community and by helping us to make a new beginning on the continent of Africa, first with the inmate population, could win a place in the hearts of Africans that would gain for America a strong foothold on the strategically important continent. If we look at what Europe and America did for the Jews of the world by creating a state for them in what is called Palestine, we ask, why can't this model be used again to create a state for those Black people who would be willing to work to build a new reality for our people now and in the future? Europe released its prisoners to the colonies of the New World, not only to populate colonies, but to build a new reality from a wilderness. It worked in Australia and New Zealand, were also populated by prisoners from Europe. 25% of our youth are in some way connected with the criminal justice system. And about half of the jails and prisons, according to this timing, are populated by Blacks. When you consider the high rate of recidivism and the cost to maintain prisoners, and when you consider that integration has not worked to advance the condition of many of our people, shouldn't we be open to new ideas? Especially when they are rooted in models that have worked in the past? Suppose we ask our brothers and sisters in Africa to carve out of that huge continent a territory for Blacks from the diaspora to begin to build a new reality. Since Africans were involved in the slave trade, which brought their kith and kin to these shores in chains, thus having a hand in bringing us to our wretched present day condition, should not Africa also have a hand in our redemption? Some of the people would be willing to build a new reality on the continent of Africa And we could do it in a way that benefits Africa, America, as well as ourselves. The Muslims have shown a tremendous ability to reform those of our people who break the law. The movie Malcolm X demonstrated how the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would reform an 8th grade dropout student and a so-called criminal into a world leader. How many future world leaders are languishing in prisons who may never have a chance to demonstrate to the world what the Almighty Creator has put in them? Our prisoners need a chance to do something constructive with their lives. America should be willing to support the Nation of Islam for the next 3 or more years to teach unhindered in the jails and prisons to begin the process of reform. Meanwhile, we could work with African governments towards the establishment of a territorial base for our people. There are many Black scholars and professionals who are not presently working, who would be willing to teach and train the inmate population in the skills necessary to work and build a new reality. We would offer the prisoners a chance to be reformed, trained, and then work off their time building a new reality on the continent of Africa. Amends have never been made fully for the destruction of Black people during the Holocaust of slavery and through the institutions of racism that have prevailed from that time to the present day. The moral issue of rectifying its role in dehumanizing an entire people still hovers over America. In America, many of our people have been written off as members of a permanent underclass, meaning the country has lost hope in improving the condition of these people. As discussed earlier, many of our people have lost their jobs in disproportionate numbers when compared to job loss and unemployment rates among white people due to the deteriorating economy. This idea should be open to all of those, the permanent underclass and the unemployed, who would be interested in making a new reality for themselves on the continent of Africa. The majority of Black people will not wish to go anywhere. Let me say that again. The majority of Black people will not wish to go anywhere because of the contributions that our forefathers have made to this land and the contributions that Blacks continue to make to America. Most of our people feel that this is our only home. However, a small but significant number would be willing to try to build a new reality on the African continent with the support of this government. We would propose that some of and at the time it was $18,000, but today is somewhere around $60,000 is spent each year per inmate to warehouse them in a cell. That money can be redirected to support building a new reality as outlined here. We would give the inmate the right to choose to stay here or to build a new reality in a land of their own. The freedom of choice, the right of the people to choose has been and always will be part of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We have given our people an opportunity to make an enlightened choice on their behalf for the past 60 to 90 years, and we will continue to do the same in the future. We would ask that the participants be granted the same dual citizenship that allows Jews to travel back and forth to Israel, making their contributions on both sides of the Atlantic. I end because my time went a little bit long. Excuse me for that extra time. Thank you. Salam alaikum.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Now with that, I'd like to introduce and certainly bring on Mr. Lee Carr. Lee?
How you doing today? First, I'd like to thank Mr. Marquise, which I don't know if a lot of you guys know him, But when I was in prison a few months ago, Mr. Marquise is a friend of my son, and he reached out to me about this reentry stuff that he was trying to do on his own at that time, I believe. And when I came home, I made contact with him, and he introduced me to Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank and I had a sit down, and we talked about the reentry program and the fact that I just come home. And I said I would definitely want to be involved because I want people to know from the perspective of someone who's been to jail many, many years ago, but who just went to prison in 2010 and recently came home and has a plethora of understanding from the inside of what I went through and from what I can see going forward, what needs to help those who to reentry society, and what also needs to help, like he said, with the front end of being in jail. So I'd like to thank Mr. Frank. I'd like to thank Mr. Doran. I'd like to thank all the doctors, all the people involved, Brother Courtney. And I would like to begin with the front end, because as Mr. Doran had spoken, television and doing all the things that are not productive make people continue to come back to prison because they're not learning anything new. So if the community or the government or the powers that be were willing to implement more programs in the front end of jail, which like he did talk about, with more vocational classes, more schooling, things of that nature, then we'll have a lot less recidivism rate on those people on the front end of jail. Now, when you go to prison, it's one and the same to me in a sense, except that in jail you have a shorter sentence, and in prison you have a longer sentence. And so in prison, if you have those guys doing the same thing that you do in jail, which is playing cards, which is watching television, which is playing sports, which is nothing wrong with playing sports, it helps you stay physically fit. But you also have to be engaged in mind. You also have to put things in the mind to make for a better future. And that comes with schooling, which in the federal system, they actually had taken schooling out of the system back in 1998, I believe it was, under the Zimmerman law. And the Zimmerman law basically states that the recidivism rate was so high that there was no need for education, which in all logic, the recidivism rate wasn't really high. It was the numbers that were falsified to make the people who voted on the bill remove the education from the federal system. Because I was in prison for 10 years, and the guys that I were around who were actually learning ourselves, were self-taught and picking up books and newspapers and reading and talking about how we want to go further in our future and do the right things. It was all about education. It was all about learning. It was all about doing something productive. Okay, we did play sports, we did watch television, but 90% of the day was doing something productive. So if you put that on the back end, where 90% of the day is doing nothing, you're going to come out with nothing. You're going to come out worse than when you went in because you're not learning anything. So in regards to the programs that need to be, we definitely need more funding for the front end. And also we still need to have, we need to re-enter education into the federal system, because in the federal system, everyone's really serving a long sentence. So if you're there and you're serving a long sentence and you have nothing that's productive for you, again, you'll just, be a person who comes back and forth, and then they penalize you for stuff that you've already done time for, which shouldn't be fair either, because you've served your sentence for this time. And now that this is on your record, you come back with another situation, they give you another 5 to 10 years for something that you already served time for. That's not fair. It's not under the double jeopardy clause, but it's still not fair. So in regards to the laws, they need to be able to take that out of their sentencing practices, because this is why so many people in the federal prison have so much time. Not because they're, because a lot of people in the federal prison are in there for not major drug offenses. They're in there for, a light drug offenses, but yet their criminal history has made them get 10 years, 20 years, and all that kind of stuff. Myself didn't have a long criminal history, but I was sentenced to a 20-year term because I chose to go to trial and make the government prove what they were saying I had done wrong. Now, that's neither here or there, because I've been convicted. I did my time and I came home. But if you really dig down into the system, you can see the systematic racism that's involved in there. Because I know guys who have criminal histories that are worse than mine from another ethnic background who got less time than me. and they did the same thing that I did or more. And with the trial, I know guys who were major distributors, but were of a different ethnic background who got less time to me. And I got caught with no drugs at all. You know, so the system is definitely not just. And we need to look at it from a perspective of, even with all of the injustice that's happening in the system, we need to be more concerned about the people like we are here who are in the system. How can we help them to learn and be more provident in their life going forward? And it's all boils down to education. You know, that's the thing, that's the main, and education not always just, you know, going to college, because I don't have a college degree, but yet in prison, I took a lot of classes, but also with those classes, I did a lot of extra stuff on my own time, because they don't afford you. I had my parents and my friends, I know I had them send me so much stuff. I still have at least 100 and some books, you know, because I constantly had them sending me stuff to read, to do, and to pay attention to the current events that was happening. And that allowed me to have a better understanding of life going forward, because what I thought I knew, I didn't really know. You know, and so I was living my life under the guise that, okay, this is how we do, this is what we do, but that was all wrong. And that's how most guys are in prison, because I have guys who will sit and say to me, you know, my best thinking got me here. And I would tell them, you know, think about that. Your best thinking didn't get you here. Your worst thinking got you. Your best thinking is something that you have yet to come across, because you haven't done anything yet. You haven't put anything new into your thinking, you know, a mind to be better. You know, so I would just say that that going forward, it has to be about education. It has to, and also they have a thing where when you come out that you can't really you know, talk to other felons. You know, and I think that needs to be addressed as well in the situation, because who's going to support another felon? Just like if you have someone who goes to a drug program, you have a support team, which are mostly people who have beaten that disease. And they've had ups and downs in that situation, but yet they still beat the disease. So if you feel like taking a drink, the first person you call is your support person who has beaten that disease already. So if I'm a person like myself who's been home for, you know, 100 or something days, who's been very productive, who has 2 jobs, who has a car, who has a place to stay, who has a little bank account, and someone else comes home and they're struggling to do these things, I can be their support system. So that, I believe that's something that needs to be addressed in this big conversation as well, because no one understands what we go through as people who are coming home. No one understands that you've been in prison for 5, 10 years, and you know, a lot of people have died in your family, and you have no real, you know, support out there, and you come home and you don't even have a roof over your head. And then you have to go to a shelter, and the shelter is not the greatest place to be, because there's so many, you know, disruptive things going on in there. It makes it hard. So the first thing you want to do is get to where you can afford to be able to find yourself a place. And sometimes that goes back to the streets. It shouldn't be so, but if you have no support, you have no way of making yourself provident, that's the first thing you're going to do. I was just fortunate enough to have people in my corner, but more importantly, I was understanding what prison can do to me and my family and my community. It can end my life, but when it ends my life, it ends a generation's life. It just doesn't end my life. I got 4 kids, I got 5 grandkids. So now they're growing up without a father figure, or they're growing up without someone who can tell them the rights and wrongs of what's going on in the world to a certain degree. You know, so I think that education, I think felons being able to communicate with one another. I think people like myself being able to go back into the prisons and have these discussions with those folks, or the halfway houses, or even the rehab centers. We can give a lot of support to those people who are coming through the same trenches that we came through. And I think that also needs to be addressed inside of the reentry process. You know, but like Mr. Doran said, the main thing is education. We have to have education inside vocational classes, a formal education. We have to have that inside of the system in order to make people more provident. And we also have to have incentives. Incentives are a very big part. Like in federal prison, you get no incentives. In jails and state prison, I'm not really familiar with jails from the last time I was there, but I know in state prison, you get a lot of, at least in New York State, you get a lot of incentives for programming and these things, and it allows you to get time off. and we need to have that same type of a direction towards the federal system. Because if you go to the federal system, no matter what charge it is, no matter what you do, you're doing 85 to 87% of that time. You know, and that's not right for a nonviolent person. Like he said, 999. You have a lot of nines in the feds. In fact, when these bills just passed, I want to say the Obama administration put forth the all drugs -2. They put the 18 from 100 to 1 crack cocaine to 18 to 1 law in effect, which allowed nonviolent offenders to get a sentence reduction based off of these factors. And then, you know, Trump did sign the last bill, which made the 18 to 1 retroactive, which applied to me, which allowed me to get out of prison early, plus my good behavior, because what they had said at that point was that my sentence had changed from 235 months, which is 19 years and almost 20 years basically, to 188 months, which is 15 years and 8 months, but it wouldn't change from 188 months with the new law. But what happened was my good behavior is what got me out of prison. And at 10 years and 4 months, they said, okay, this guy's done enough time. He's got no trouble. I've taken apprenticeships. And this is in the federal system, but these apprenticeships are not in every prison. They're only in a few prisons. So therefore, everyone doesn't get the benefit of those apprenticeship programs. And I was in 4 different prisons, 4 different federal prisons. Because I was doing good, my levels changed, not because I was doing bad or got in trouble or anything like that. So my levels changed, and I was able to acquire things to make me, I guess, a minimum risk a person. Because I don't like the word inmate; it makes me just feel uncomfortable. But a minimum risk person, and I was able to come home. And so that's my take on the first part of this discussion. But I also have to say again. Respect to Brother Courtney for laying out his reading, because some of those things that he talked about in that reading was something that me and the fellas back at the place we discussed. And I was in Otisville camp, which is in New York, and they call it a Jewish camp. And I was around a bunch of Jewish fellas, I was around a bunch of white fellas, I was around a bunch of people, you know, and we all had very intellectual conversations about going forward. And a lot of stuff we touched on was a lot of stuff that Brother Courtney was reading. So I appreciate him for reading that as well. And that is about the end of my discussion at this point. But I really appreciate all you guys for allowing me to participate in this. And I hope I can be a voice for many people who are coming through those 700 to some 1,000 people that are coming home, because, you know, we want to do better. We just need resources and options to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And certainly now before I turn it over to Doc Woods, I just want to remind everybody that to continue with our program after we go off the air over WPNY, you can join us on the internet, certainly with respect to the address that I gave previously. And now just want to also discuss that next week, our webinar and broadcast scheduled to begin at 7 p.m. will be on the topic of domestic violence and mental health. And with that, and without much further ado, Doc Woods.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I presume you can. Okay, well, I'm very, very honored to be a part of this program, and each week be able to add a small musical segment to what's being discussed, because the topics and things being discussed are very, very powerful, and they're life-changing, and they could be greatly life-enhancing if they were applied to people who actually need these benefits and opportunities and recognition and compassion. So I have this concept that I've been teaching each time called the cry. And what happens is when people use their music, they make a musical cry. And if you hear the musical cry first, it probably will not escalate into greater misunderstanding or violence. So now we're going to hear a cry from a great saxophone artist named Joshua Redman. And Joshua Redman won the Thelonious Monk contest in 1993. And from there, he's been a virtuoso who's had multiple performances of his works and his abilities. So now there's a song that the Beatles did called Let It Be. And Joshua Redmond is going to play this on his saxophone. A cry can be tender and passionate and soft and even sweet. Doesn't have to be a scream, or doesn't have to be a fight, or doesn't have to be always manifest by anger. So now when you say let it be, that's the same as in saying when you say amen, you're saying so be it. That's the way that it should be, and you agree. So now when you say let it be, you're saying the same thing. Listen at the tender cry that comes from Joshua Redmond and his saxophone. cry from Joshua Redmond. Let it be.
Doc, that was wonderful. Thank you. And in fact, it's inspirational, not just wonderful music, but also an inspirational, as you are and have been every week for the last 6. With that, now we're rotating right into the question and answer period. And just once again, want to remind those that are going off the air on WPNY, you can join us at communityforjustice.org, communityforjustice.org, and we'll see you there. Now, let's go back to Professor Larson as the first question regarding further bail reform. What do you think?
What do I think? I think as long as we understand that people should not be locked up because they're poor, and that we do have reliable, unfortunately, essentially the algorithms and the systems that are used often to determine flight or community risk for letting people out, they tend to be basically sort of racially biased. There's plenty of research to show that that's the case. If we can get those things out of the system, then I think it's legitimate to say there are some people who really are could be a risk to others. You know, we're having a talk next week about domestic violence. I mean, that's certainly an area into which you want to keep people safe for short periods of time of confinement. But other than that, one thing I think it's important to understand is that other countries just don't see these things the way that we do. In the United States, we tend to see our practices as natural and inevitable, and they absolutely are not. Confinement in many countries is absolutely the last resort, right? It seems nonsensical if you're trying to help people get into a constructive life to lock them up and before, right, on the way to doing that. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I think further reform and getting closer to what the original idea was of that bail reform is a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I've got a question here for Mr. Lee. Please speak to the issue of whether jail or prison is rehabilitative. In my conversations with students, they believe that rehabilitation is the purpose of incarceration. We have to, Mr. Lee.
Perhaps Lee, you want to address that? So I think you.
Yes, in fact, I think we'll need to have him unmuted. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, as far as the jail and prison being rehabilitative, it is not. It's all about punishment, you know, because to be rehabilitated, you have to give them something new. You have to have something new, something different. So if you're sitting in there like the we discussed earlier, playing cards and watching television and there's no education and there's nothing to make your mind grow, there's no way to be rehabilitated. Now there's a selective few in there who are rehabilitated, but they do like I've done. They've actually gotten, and they have the support. Because if you don't have the support, then you're not going to be able to do the things that I've done or others have done, like your family bringing you books or sending you books and you know, taking a proactive approach in your rehabilitation, because you're the person.
Education.
Excuse me?
The lowest common denominator, education.
I mean, that's in anything that we think about. It's all going to boil around that. But now, what do you have to educate yourself? Because even in some jails and prisons, the library, the public library that they have is it really doesn't have anything of, and you got, you know, gangster storage, you got sex storage, you got, you know, money storage, you know, those that's not rehabilitative stuff. That's actually only feeding the mind with more negative energy. So now you're thinking of the negative versus trying to be, you know. And then the last place I was at, it was like that because of the population there. They call it a Jewish camp. That's what they actually called it. So out of the 110, 12 people that were there, you can say 50, 60 of them were from the Jewish background. And so therefore we had things there that were better than anywhere I've ever been as far as book-wise, you know, because you got a lot of real estate books, you got a lot of financial books, you got a lot of things that can help you grow. And that's what I was into. But in most other places, you don't have that kind of stuff.
Beautiful.
You know, so.
Thank you. That's a great response. I have another one here for the professor. Don't most people in county jail have very short or uncertain week-to-week stays in jail? And how can programs fit this constant ebb and flow? Professor?
What I would, say to that is there are people who are serving, as I mentioned, if you're serving 3 months, you can get a certification, you could finish a college course, right? That can be fit into that period of time. But also I know, and I know that Courtney Muhammad can speak to this as well, is the fact that there's an enormous amount of good work that's done, I know, in the state prisons by volunteers who come in and do work. And these are not time-sensitive projects. If you can get into a room with people who have never been taken seriously as thinkers or people who can traffic in ideas, and you can give it a sense that they have those capacities, just a few sessions could be transformative for people, right? And so I think most importantly is that if people go into a setting where they feel like the institution is there, and in order to be forward-looking, right, preparing them for their future lives, rather than simply about judging their pasts, which cannot be changed. I think that, putting that kind of attitude into, or putting resource behind that attitude can itself be transformative for folks.
Let's get Brother Courtney to chime in.
Yeah.
Listening to both Lee and Mr. Larson, working as a minister in the city of Utica, a lifelong resident of Utica. I'm 55 years old, so I've been around to see the up and the down and the continued down, and then we getting a slide up in Utica now. But the reality of my life has been that for Black people, it's always been tough in Utica, and it has not gotten any better. And so when I look at Utica, and I've been in Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, New York, the boroughs, working with the department, and I got to see the same thing in those same areas. So even though we in the Nation of Islam, it's been documented, have the best rehabilitation program in the country for rehabilitating inmates, they still go home to the same community that is, as one seems to come home rehabilitated, 2 and more go into prison. So the communities are so bad that we need to look at a more of a fix on both sides. So what I presented earlier was more of what I've seen over my 20 years. And just to say this, the architecture of white supremacy is something that is in white people's minds, not necessarily the white supremacists. It's the architecture, it's the structure in which this nation has been built. And it's not just in white people's minds, it's in Black people's minds also. So the supremacist mindset and an inferior mindset that we have in our communities, it causes us to continue to be in this state and condition that we're in. So just to say, yes, I've seen some programs that have worked, college education. Back when we had the college program, it definitely turned the tides for many, many brothers in the prison system. Many of those were incarcerated, but still, and not to be long, we recognize that something bigger needs to be done now, because even though Lee has come home, he's coming home to a city that needs a lot of work. And we're seeing our young people do and go right back in as he just came out.
Right. Well, listen, thank you,
That's
brother.
true.
I have, in fact, kind of an open question here for all our panelists, and certainly maybe one can chime in. How might in-jail programming transition to educational opportunities, academic and vocational, outside? In fact, this is a great segue from this last question. Who would like to take that one?
Well, I can speak to just in some of the practical parts of that.
Right ahead.
One is that if you have, certainly in terms of higher education, the people who are going to be providing higher education inside are going to be your local institutions of higher education. And once you're out, you continue to be a student. We have people who, because of their short stays at the minimum security prison, where we have a college program here, can't finish their degrees. But the moment they come out, they can actually transfer to a community college wherever they're returning to. We've had graduates in that program who moved on. They've already taken their AA degree and they transition as juniors into any SUNY campus. So technically that transition is seamless. The problem is, of course, funding and supporting people because we have funding to support that program inside. But once they're outside, as Lee has spoken to, people are pretty much on their own.
Well, certainly, Professor, one of the involved in, certainly at the college of, from which I hail, Mohawk Valley Community College, the second chance programs are certainly something that we're working towards, and certainly the federal government and I think Congress is certainly starting to understand the value of that. And I would encourage all listening and hearing this broadcast that they contact their local, federal, and state officials to let them know that it's an investment, not an expense. I do have another question here, and it relates more to staff at the jails, whether it's federal, state, or local. How might reluctant jail staff be brought on board with these efforts? Who'd like to take that one?
I mean, I'll just speak on it to a little bit on what I think, from being on the inside, because I was around a lot of reluctant staff, and I was also around some compassionate, caring folks as well. And my thing is from an incentive approach. Like, I think everyone for their good deed, everyone should do good deeds, period. But we know that's just not the case. But we do know incentives help people do more good things. You know what I mean? So whatever incentive that might be for the reluctant, because in the feds, they have the GED program, but they don't give the guys the GED test, right? So if the incentive comes from the top down, the people who are giving these tests, if you give these tests and you complete or graduate more people, there should be some type of incentive toward, let's say, more paid days off, or PTO, or more vacation time, or something that allows them to be more engaged. And the more that they're engaged, the more that they begin to graduate people, I think the more caring they'll be. Because if you see the benefits of your actions, I just think that no matter who you are, well, not no matter who you are, but I just think that sometimes it allows you to soften your approach a little bit, and you'll be more inclined with, okay, well, I helped this guy get this and he graduated, and you see how successful or happy that person is, and it'll make you want to do more. Plus, you got some PTO or some more vacation time, so it makes you just work a little harder no matter what it is. If you're incentivized, I think you do a little bit more. And that's how you get reluctant people to be a part of something that they wouldn't normally be a part of.
Well, thank you very much there, Mr. Carr or Lee. I've got one here for the group, and again, who would be responsible for offering programming?
I can tell you from my experience with the college programs that that I've been part of organizing. Essentially, the educational institution is responsible for the delivery of courses, and the facility is responsible basically for all the logistics surrounding, right, everything that goes out outside of the actual classroom. This is the point where we've actually had one of the local jails actually accredited by mid-states as a branch campus of a community college. So that essentially when that door closes, those people are actually at the college, even though they're still on the campus, right, of the prison. And so in some sense, those jobs can fit pretty much hand in glove. The main issue we run into is the first priority of all prisons is security. The public doesn't really care about these programs, for the simple reason that as long as nobody inside gets outside, most of the public is really willing to forget about people who are locked up. And so that's got to be the priority, or it is in fact the priority of the institutions themselves. And when security is always the priority, you simply run into logistical issues. Right now, we're looking at the issue of trying to deliver courses remotely because of COVID. We can't actually go inside. And docs, as I'm sure Courtney Muhammad and Waleed may be different in the federal system, is really tech phobic. They like being low tech environments. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that change in culture to bring those things inside. Right.
Can I just check? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I thought you were done. I apologize.
No. Go ahead. Sorry.
With as far as who should be responsible for some of that training, in the federal system, a lot of people don't know. Well, there's I think that the government and the federal system should definitely be responsible for that training, because they do so much wasteful spending. I mean, they spend millions of dollars on things that they already have. And I've been in facilities where there's literally, because I did well in prison as far as like my behavior. So it was certain things that I would have access to as working as a clerk or in the office with some of the officers. And there's millions of dollars of equipment and tools every year that they destroy because they want to spend the money that they get in the next budget. So some of that funding, I think, should be able to go towards some of the reentry programs or programs that's needed in the federal system to help those people become more prominent in their life. Because millions of spending.
There has been, in fact, as I'm reading here, according to federal student aid records, nearly 5,000 incarcerated students received federal Pell Grants in the years 2016, 2017. So there's some slight change that's going on, and hopefully we can continue. But there is some opportunity there once again when you're inside to take advantage of this, and it does appear that they're seeing good results out of it.
And that just to comment on that too, because I was there when they were speaking about that. Mm-hmm. And what it is right now, because I just left there shortly ago, is that they're doing pilot programs. So that's not federal BOP wide. That's only just because you got to think there's over 160,000 federal inmates, and the 5,000 is good, but there needs to be much more, because I was in a prison in Danbury Correctional Facility, and we were on the warden about trying to get that program because it was pilot programs. And she would just, no, none of you got, they would just hammer us like that. But there are a lot of guys who would benefit from that. So I'm proud of the 5,000, but there needs to be, much more,
And well, once again, it gets back to the question about the reluctance of jail and prison staff. I have one last question. In fact, this one here, I can relate to, and certainly relay this to Brother Courtney. How does teaching, and certainly this can be open to anyone that's been impacted by it, but how does teaching of religion in jails help the inmate to be released to a better life?
Well, as I said before, and I didn't take the time to bring up the stats or anything, but we understand that when you can reconnect the soul to its creator, and then give that individual the needs in order for him to start to make his change, we see true rehabilitation. So in fact, with the Nation of Islam and other religious groups, they have been able to do that, to reconnect the soul of that individual to its creator. And then you see a new man, you see a new creature, as you would say, a new creature in Christ. But it's understood. I mean, I don't want anybody to think that we can stand here and sugarcoat anything about corrections. As Lee said, or Mr. Carr said, there's no rehabilitation there. And for the amount of money that's being spent in order to keep people incarcerated. And I want to just just open the box a little bit, take the lid off the box, because the problem that we don't address when it comes to incarceration is, why are they incarcerated in the first place? And so I heard Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King say, he quoted Victor Hugo. He said, if you leave the soul in darkness, it will commit sin. But the guilty one is not the one who committed the sin, it's the one who created the darkness. So when you go into the Black and brown communities of America, you see a darkness that is there, that our young people can't navigate through that darkness, but there's a system that's constructed on the architecture of white supremacy. And so I know as a fact, because when I would go into the areas that farming is no longer, mills are no longer, but they have prisons. And the prisons become the economy of that entire area. Outside of having prisons, they would not have jobs. And they have pretty good jobs on the taxpayers' back. So, this is a longer story, but the reality is we can't keep on keeping this thing in the box and figuring out ways to make it work. I read an excellent book called The New Crow.
Yeah.
And Michelle Alexander, she gave, from a legal standpoint, how corrupt the criminal justice system is in incarcerating Black and brown individuals. And it shows that it's not bordered. She put it in a criminal element, and it not just destroys, as brother said, him, it destroys the families that individual is connected to. And that's a whole nother story that can be written on the effects of incarceration. And why do you have to take a man from New York City and Brooklyn and bring him all the way to Clinton Dannemora, or fly him across the country to California and break up his family? It was understood as a chaplain that if you can keep a connection with the family, if you can continue to keep him connected to this family that's connected to the community, he has a better chance of getting out and surviving. But I watched policy in corrections say that a chaplain cannot give a phone call to an inmate, and then start to challenge the chaplains that they had to have so much distance away from the inmate that it could not become a true chaplain inmate connection. You had to kind of have this role of just take your paycheck and shut up and come in the next day. And if you act up a little bit too much, that question that was asked, what hinders the progress in the facility? The construct of the architecture of white supremacy is too strong. It's insurmountable. It's inside and outside, and it's not something that we can joke with, we can play with, or we can come up with programs to overcome. White supremacy has to die in order for humanity to live. And that's where we're at this point in corrections. I'll leave it at that point.
Thank you. In fact, we've got about 12 minutes left. So what I like to do is wrap this up by giving each one of our panel members about 3 minutes or so to kind of wrap it up based on their presentation, and certainly the comments and questions that have been asked and given. So why don't we start with maybe with Professor Larson?
Sure, thanks. Two things I think in particular I'd like to point to. People often object when you're doing programming in prisons that you're giving something away, right? Giving education to folks inside. One, you can't give anyone an education. They have to earn it, right? People in our program, fall out, if they don't do the work. Also to think about the fact that what we're doing when we're doing programming, it's not that we're giving something. What we're trying to reduce is excess punishment. The punishment is the years that you have been sentenced to. It's not a lifetime of being marked as a felon, though that comes with it, right? And being constantly at a disadvantage. If we think about where we want people to come out when they come out of prison and be on an even playing field, people who come out of prison are basically walking in a ditch through that field. And what programming is trying to do is to fill up that ditch, right? Have something to compensate for that history they have. The second thing that I want to focus on is, hearing what Courtney Muhammad is saying. I absolutely hear, and understand the issue of, or don't understand, but I accept the argument about white supremacy. But this system eats up everyone that's in it. Oneida County has 3 prisons. It is one of the major employers here. There's a great book called Lockdown America. It's about the prison system, and its chapter on carceral Keynesianism, which is to say the system of spreading jobs by creating prisons. Its opening chapter is about Rome, New York, which then had 4 prisons in it. The people who work in those prisons, corrections officers, die 15 years before other Americans. They die because of stress, alcoholism, suicide. These are jobs that are killing people, and the reason they kill people is because you have no responsibility except negative responsibilities. Telling people no, locking them up, punishing them, and that kind of engagement will do damage to yourself and your psyche and to your life. In other countries, they had that same problem. They gave CEOs actual responsibilities, positive responsibilities. Their life expectancies went right back up to normal. All right. So all these changes can be good for all communities involved.
Thank you, Professor. In fact, why don't we go to Brother Courtney Muhammad?
I absolutely second what you're saying, Mr. Larson. Coming into corrections as a Black man, a young Black man, and seeing all of my brothers locked down, of course, you want to do all you can to help them and free their mind. But I ran into so many obstacles and blocks, and they finally did get rid of me. Not for doing anything wrong, but that same group that you spoke of, those who are working, attacked someone who was only trying to do good, and they made false allegations, and then the construct just works the way it works. Anyone that comes in to do good or to tear down that which is harming everyone, people take that as an attack on their jobs and the structure that they only know. So I changed at a certain point to say that just what you said, 15 years less. And I questioned one of the superintendents of training, why do corrections workers, particularly these officers, die so soon? And he said, stress. I said, well, can't we do anything? He said, we don't have the money and there's not the will to do it. So I even took it to different channels because I realized it's not good for anyone. And if anything, in order to keep us down, somebody has to be down there with us. So we need to relook and and just to say, this particular commission is out of an executive order by Mr. Cuomo, whom his father, Mario, was over the largest prison expansion in history. And he said, Andrew, that's the one Black spot on his father's record. My mother loved Mario because he brought the educational program in, the college program that really helped a lot of individuals. But he said that's one thing he's going to change. And I remember being a chaplain and hearing different governors and others say that they're going to close facilities. And when you get to that time, they never close because of the unions, the officers' unions, which unfortunately, you have officers that are wrong, but you have unions that support them in their wrong, which is more wrong. So when Andrew came on, he actually closed facilities. I've never seen anything like it. We went from 72 facilities down to now, I think 50 facilities. And I felt for those who were losing their jobs because there was no real net for them. But the reality is he said that we can't keep on employing people off of the misery of other people. That was a hard, decision to make, but it's a correct decision. And this particular executive order for police departments, I hope that we can look seriously into what's going on the streets of Utica and Syracuse and Rochester and throughout New York State. And the one thing that I do know, New York State probably, from at least my investigation, had the best, even though it's not the best, had the best best correction system in all of the country. And after the Attica riots, we produced programs and made changes that actually reverberated across the entire globe. So New York is in a very good position if the right people get in the right positions. Personally, I had people like Scott McNamara. I had the county executive, Anthony Pacenti, the then Assemblywoman, Roanne DeStito. I even had the parole head chairman, George Alexander, and we were bringing a reentry program right to Mid-State Corrections, and the green lights was on. But when I got back to Albany, I was told, stand back. You are no longer doing reentry. Like, this is our initiative that you said you wanted. Well, we're not giving anything to Utica. I'm like, we're not asking for anything. We just want to be able to accept those who are coming back to our area. And it was told to me, basically, you're out of luck here in corrections. And from that day until the day that they found a way to get rid of me, they stayed on me to get me off of this thing.
Stand down.
Stand down. Otherwise, take your and go home.
Thank you, brother.
Terry.
Brother, thank you very much for sharing that. Now, Mr. Carr, what do you got?
Yes.
A couple of minutes, and then I want to wrap it up with just about a minute. When
Okay, well, I'll be pretty quick. First, I'd like to say, again, thank you to everybody, and a special thanks to Brother Courtney too for all he said and the work that he's been doing throughout his time in the DLC, and also the book, The New Jim Crow. I read that book twice. If you guys out there listening and watching have not read that book, get that book. That book is so informative and gives you so much understanding of what it is that we're talking about right now. And another thing I would like to say for all those who are paying attention, watching, and internet and listening, if you can, donate to the system. Books, good books, business books, self-help books, religious books, because those are all things that are going to be beneficial to a person being provident in their life. And also the religion aspect. You have to have a foundation in order to stand on something solid to move forward. And I think that's very important from the person who asked that question, how. If you have that foundation, it allows you a better understanding of how to be good people. So with that being said, I know we don't have a lot of time. I appreciate you guys and just support the cause, everyone that's out there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. In fact, as we're wrapping up here, a very good friend and certainly that would like to just say a very deep and meaningful evening. Kudos to all for your insight and wisdom. Deep bow to you, Mr. Carr, and I hope you continue to inspire through your actions versus your intentions. Always an honor to be in your presence, Courtney. You represent the calm and meaningful dialogue that is so needed. Thank you. Mr. Larson, or Professor Larson, your insight was articulate and valued. Thank you for your words. And well, with that, I just want to once again thank the College Community Partnership for Racial Justice and presented online. That has been presented this evening through the Levitt Center for Public Affairs at Hamilton College. Thank you to WPNY. And don't forget, folks, next week, it's domestic violence and mental health. Good night.
Good night.